Today we're going to be looking at risk management for homeowners. And these are the basic things we're going to look at. We're not going to go into tremendous depth. This is the typical homeowners insurance or household insurance. Just give you some awareness of what they're about. Very basically, there's a tremendous amount of detail that you can go into for these policies, but it's not necessary for our needs. We want to give you a basic overall knowledge of what is actually entailed and what is covered, what is not covered on a very basic level, no detail. And to get you thinking about the sort of areas you should be looking at, not just for homeowners or household insurance, but for anything that involves a risk, because a lot of these ideas that we're going to be looking at are generic. So let's have a look at the introduction. So the homeowners policy was basically set up, the present policy at any rate, to give coverage for liability and property. So it's giving you more than one type of coverage. You know, back in the day, it never used to be like that, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So typically they cover somebody's dwelling. So the dwelling is basically where they live, the residence where they live, the contents, additional living expenses resulting from a loss that's insured that occurs to the dwelling. So if your home is flooded or burns down, then normally they'll pay, the insurance company will pay to put you up in a hotel or somewhere else. And personal liability claims against the insured: if someone comes to your house, falls over, breaks their leg, and they sue you, then you're liable. And this type of policy will cover you for that. So traditionally, homeowners insurance have been stable. It's referring more to the rates. Premiums tend to not increase by that much each year, and this type of insurance, the line of insurance, is just a type of insurance. There's different lines of insurance, meaning different types of insurance. But this type of insurance is not sensitive to losses, as is personal auto. So say, for example, you have a loss or two. You do not have to face watching your rates go up dramatically with typically with as you do with auto. So with homeowners, you may have a claim. They're not very large. Your rates probably stay relatively stable, but with auto, they're going to shoot up. Sometimes, occasionally, an event occurs, even with homeowners insurance, that dramatically impacts this type of insurance. The biggest of these events in the US have mostly been hurricanes, and the costliest insured catastrophe in US history so far, and in fact in world history, was Hurricane Katrina in 2005, which caused about $52 billion in insured property losses. You can see there's been other losses there as well. Let's see, since 1992, Hurricane Andrew, $19 billion, and hailstorms in Texas and Oklahoma, they were kind of costly as well, for $150 million. Los Angeles riots, $500 million, and you can see that the insurance companies pay out a lot of money. So the combined losses push the combined ratio. That's called the loss ratio. The loss ratio is the losses plus expenses divided by the premium. So it's some measure of saying, this is what I've had coming, this is what I've paid out for my losses and my expenses, and divide that by what I've had coming in. And often if it's 100%, it basically means what I've received in premiums is what I've paid out as claims. If it goes over 100%, like to 105%, 150 or 160%, which it often does when there's a big catastrophe, that means that for every dollar you're bringing in, you're paying out $1.6. So as you can imagine, a lot of dozens, it says, many insurers actually went bankrupt when these losses came to be. So we're going to be looking at a table. In fact, why don't we look at the table, and I'll just talk about the table. The table that you're looking at shows the 10 most costly catastrophes from insured losses in US history. So these losses are all quite recent. As time goes, They're not that old. January 1994, I guess it may seem like a long time ago for most of you, but not really that long ago. These losses are quite recent. They're eight of the 10 are in fact wind-related losses, all apart from the 9/11 attacks are primarily losses to residential property. So therefore, they're paid mostly by homeowners insurance. So when we look at Hurricane Katrina, that was basically damaged and destroyed a lot of homes. The costliest insured catastrophes we mentioned earlier in U.S. history, and as I said, world history, is Hurricane Katrina, 2005, at about $52 billion. That's the estimate for it. So let's move on. Now, major hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, fires, they can all destroy a great deal of property, and they can cause billions of dollars of losses, as you've seen from the previous slide. These types of losses affect the availability of insurance as well as contract provisions. So, for example, windstorm coverage will be more available and cheaper in Ohio, where they're not really going to suffer from windstorms, than Florida, where they are going to suffer from windstorms. So people living along rivers have a much more difficult time with the flood exposures than those inland. And these issues are important for the reasons we're going to look at here. They're important for all practical purposes. Homeowners insurance is a necessity because of these things we just mentioned. I just mentioned to you. You can't even obtain a mortgage to purchase a home unless you can provide that you have an actual policy, homeowners policy, because the mortgage company, they're giving you money. Basically, they've got money invested in your home, and they want their investment to be well maintained, and they want to make sure that you've got a well-placed household homeowners insurance. And you must maintain it throughout the time of the loan. Homeowners in southern Florida and Hawaii have had availability problems, which I alluded to a little bit earlier. In Florida, new laws have been passed to make insurance available in coastal areas. So basically what happens is when there's a big windstorm and there's a lot of losses, insurance companies do a couple of things. They may do a couple of things, or both. And one of them is they increase your rates, or they can actually change the type of policy. They either withdraw, they say, oh, you can't have windstorm insurance, or you can't have this, or you can't have that. Or if I keep this type of cover, say for example for windstorm, then I'm just going to charge you, not only going to charge you so much for it, but I'm only going to start paying any claim that you have, any loss that you have, after a certain limit is breached. So they may say, I'm not going to pay the first $20,000 of any loss. And so you may decide not to buy insurance anyway. So when there are losses, the provisions can change in the policies. So the homeowners program, how this developed. So basically, insurers wanted to produce a quality product for homeowners, for their home insurance. And so in 1958, there was a program developed, and it was actually the development started at the Multi-Peril Insurance Conference. And they just wanted to find a way of being able to have a decent insurance policy when it came to people's homes. So as we see here, policies to provide a more balanced and adequate program of insurance for the average homeowner. So since 1958 to now, they've been developing, and many major revisions have actually taken place. And so you can see here there's four of the major revisions that you see there, that the policies, the homeowners policies now are written in easy to understand English. There's some other things that we'll talk about in a moment, but in easy to understand English. They are multiple line, So what that means is that they cover more than one thing. So before, if you wanted to insure the contents of your home, you would get one policy. And if you wanted to insure the actual building, you'd get another policy. And if you wanted to insure yourself against liability if somebody's slipping and breaking their leg in your home, you buy another policy. But now there's multiple a policy that covers all of these things. They're multi-line policies. The third thing that's actually been developed, that a minimum amount of coverage has to be purchased, and I'll talk about that as we move on as well. And it costs less than if the individual coverages have been purchased. So if you went out and bought cover for your contents and cover for their building and then cover for liability if someone slips and breaks their legs, then if you bought those separately, they will cost you more if you buy them individually than if you buy them in a bundle. So the language of the previous policies would seem to be kind of difficult. So they tried to improve on the language. They also made the policies wording shorter, and if you see them now, they look really long. So I can only imagine how long they were before. They've also increased the font size by 25% because people couldn't even see what those policies had written on them. So let's look at the multi-line. So the basic objective of the homeowners program was to provide an opportunity for the homeowner to purchase variations in coverage, so different types of cover in just one policy, so you don't have to buy them all individually. There are several different forms. It's worth noting there are several different forms of homeowners policy. There's not just one form, one contract. It depends on the company you go to, and they all vary in some degree. But they're all set up to meet the needs of the homeowners, renters, and owners of condominiums. So you can see that coverage is provided for the home and personal property. So when we talk about property, you have to be very careful. So it's the whole point of what I'm trying to get across in most of this course, but especially the stuff we're doing today, which is the language is really very important. What does property mean? Are we talking about real property? Are we talking about all other type of property that's not real property? Whatever you're looking at, you must look at the definitions to be aware of what you as a consumer are actually purchasing, or what you as a risk manager are putting in place to protect your company or whoever you happen to be working for, or what you as an actuary, what coverage or what you're offering other people. So whichever way you look at it, even if you're an individual, if you're a risk manager trying to protect your company, or if you're an actuary actually developing these policies, you have to be aware and very careful as to the language that you use. So again, after what's the next thing in the list? Broad named perils. The things that are covered, we've got broad named perils and open perils protection is offered. So open perils is also known as all risk. It used to be known as all risk. Some people still call it all risk. Basically covers everything unless it's specifically excluded. So an all risk policy, you have to look at the exclusions to see what's excluded. If it's excluded, it's excluded, and if it's not excluded, then it's covered. The named policies, the coverage is only specifically for what's actually named on the policy. So when you purchase a policy, for that type of policy, you have to see what's named. So you have to be very careful when you're reading these things. Coverages such as personal liability and medical payments to other persons, for persons injured, for people injured on your premises, on the insured's premises, on a no-fault basis, are included. Okay, what's the minimum amount of coverage is an interesting one. So a distinguishing feature of these policies is that they provide a definite minimum amount of coverage acceptable to the insurer. And I'll give you an example in a second. And there's also typically one premium, one indivisible premium. The premiums are not split up for the different. You pay this much for liability, you pay this much for your contents of your home. It doesn't work. It doesn't really work like that. You just pay one premium. You can still pay premiums on a monthly basis if you want to, but overall it's just one premium for the policy. So let's consider an example so we can try and explain a little bit what this minimum coverage is. So in today's world, many people are moving back into older neighborhoods because often they can't afford to live in a newer, more expensive neighborhoods, and they're actually renovating the homes there. The market value of a home might be $100,000. That's what you buy it for. That's what it's on the market for. But its replacement cost. Remember, it's an old home. To replace it, if it burnt down, build a home in its place would be say $200,000. Its market value is 100 because by virtue of it being old. A standard homeowners policy would encourage the policyholder to insure at least 80% of the replacement value. Now, again, you have to look at policies. In England, you have to insure 100% of the value of the property. In many of the states, you have to insure 80% of the value of the property. It can be higher, but at least 80%. So you're not effectively insuring the whole property. But so a standard homeowners policy typically encourages policyholders over here to insure at least 80% of the replacement value. Now, the replacement value of this home, market value is only 100, but to rebuild it is 200. So if they're asking you to insure at least 80% of the 200,000, they're asking you to buy insurance for 160,000. But insurance companies are reluctant, some of them are reluctant, to insure a $100,000 home, a home that's only worth $100,000 on the market. They're reluctant to insure it for 160,000 because of the potential for moral hazard. So this has led actually to coverage being unavailable for a lot of older dwellings. The insurers just won't do it. So I was looking at the market in Wisconsin. I see some homes that they're basically $1 a square foot, and they're in really bad condition. So a 2,500 square foot home is $2,500. So they're basically pretty much giving it away to you. But they do want you to fix that home. But can you imagine if I bought a house for $2,500 and that house burnt down? To replace the house, it may cost them $150,000, $200,000. So that's why a lot of insurance companies don't want to insure those homes for that reason. So lowering costs. Let's look at lowering costs. Because the insured person buying insurance is buying a package. When you're buying a whole package of policies, you're buying property, liability, and whatever comes within those. Costs are lower than if you purchase individual policies. So you save money through having this bundled policy. The savings result from a broader range of perils being insured, which gives the insurer a better spread of the loss exposures and lower admin expenses. So there's lower admin expenses. If I was selling you, if I'm the insurer and I'm selling you one policy for the actual building, another policy for the contents, another policy for liability, if someone slips and falls and breaks their leg or something, I have a lot more admin expenses. If I sold you one policy, my administration expenses would be lower. The other thing is that the insurance company diversifies risk. If it diversifies its risk, its costs are going to be lower, which it can pass on to you. So if I did not diversify my risk and I sold individual policies, and supposing most people that wanted to get, say, insurance to cover just the actual dwelling, the actual house from me, and for the other policies they went to somebody else, for the liability they went to somebody else, and they went to other people. So I ended up with all the policies that, all the homes, just the homes, no liability, nothing else, just the homes, if anything happens to the home. If there's a big windstorm, I could get wiped out because a whole bunch of homes, especially in the similar vicinity, could get wiped out, and I could actually get wiped out as an insurer. But if I've got more risks, it's a form of diversification. So what I mean by that, if I don't insure just the actual dwelling, and I actually insure the contents as well, and I also insure liability, is some way of diversifying my portfolio to some degree. And when I diversify my estimated costs are going to be lower, so that means the estimated premium is going to be lower to the policyholder. So let's look at this example. Which of the following is or are true regarding today's homeowners policy? One, A, they provide multiple coverages in a single policy. Yeah, they do. They cover lots of different things. It's not just one thing. B, they are less expensive than purchasing each individually. The answer is yes, that's true. And C, they are easier to understand in the old homeowners policy. Apparently they are. They try to make their language easier. They make them 40% shorter and in length, and they increase the font size by 25%. So those are all true. All of the above, D would be the answer. So let's look at an example of a homeowners policy. They don't all have to look like this. The basic coverages. So certain coverages are mandatory in the homeowners program, but most homeowners insurance policies provide a minimum of $100,000 worth of liability insurance. If you scan down, you can see point E, comprehensive personal liability. So most policies do provide $100,000 worth of liability insurance, but higher amounts are available, and increasingly people are actually taking up higher amounts. So there are certain minimums that the insurance companies impose, but there's flexibility in certain areas to actually get a higher limit. Possibly there's minimums, and you can't go below that minimum. So as you can see here in the dwelling, the minimum varies by insurer, but once they find that minimum, then you look at point B. It's only going to be 10% of A, so they're all kind of dependent of each other. And this is fairly standard that there's certain parts of the policies that lock you in. If your home is worth $100,000 and the other structures can only be insured, or they're only insured for 10% of that, so $10,000, 10% of 100,000, and you move down the list. So I had a property which I was renting out, and the insurer, I wanted the insurance just for the building. I wasn't interested in the contents because the tenants, after the tenants leave, I'll just buy new furniture. And they basically said there's a minimum. Some insurers said to me, there's a minimum amount. I don't care if you don't want to insure it. There's a minimum amount that we're going to cover you for. And I said, but if you don't cover me for that, then I should get a cheaper premium because you're removing some of the coverage. But they said, no, it's fixed. You can't go below $5,000 for the insurance of the contents. There's other policies that just do not even include content. So it depends where you are. It depends which state you're in. It depends when and if you're ever involved in this sort of stuff. You have to look at what's going on at that time. So it depends on that time, because changes take place all the time. There's changes between insurers, there's changes between states, and there's change within the same insurer. The same insurer can actually change what they're doing over a period of time. So remember, what I'm showing you is indicative, and by the time you watch this video, it might even be out of date. What's the loss settlement clause? This determines, as you can see, how items are going to be valued after some damage has occurred to them, or they've been stolen, they've been burned, or they've been damaged in some way. So adjustment is you're just trying to adjust to find the actual value of it. It's just an adjustment. The people that do it, they're actually called adjusters. They're just trying to figure out the right value for the item. So the homeowners policy provides replacement cost coverage on the dwelling, so the building, and actual cash value coverage for personal property. So actual cash value is the replacement cost minus the depreciation. So it's basically the value I'd get the cash for it if I was to sell it as a used item. The loss settlement clause helps classify certain items as to whether recovery is on actual cash basis or whether it's on a replacement cost basis. So that should actually be written in there. So the loss settlement clause does help to classify item as to whether recovery is on ACV, actual cash, basis, which is replacement cost minus depreciation, or on a replacement cost, they just buy you something brand new. It states that personal property and structures that are not buildings shall be covered on an actual cost value basis. Also, typically it will specify, it specifies that certain other items is covered only on an actual cash value basis. So all carpeting, whether wall to wall or not, whether it's just a rug, household appliances, awnings, those things that cover your windows to stop the sun getting in, outdoor antennas and outdoor equipment are covered on an actual cash value basis. So that's the policies I looked at, but you must be very, very careful, always read it. And I'm stressing this point because it's the most important point of what we're covering today. There's another clause called a pair and set clause. When a part of the pair or a set, and you break up your set, and it's used to determine the value of the loss. So typically the insurance company will pay for the difference between the actual cost, the actual cash value of the item before and after the loss. So if I had a set and its actual cash value was 10,000 before the loss and it was like 2,000 after the loss, they're going to pay you that difference. But more and more companies will just take everything away and just give you the actual cash value for them. So if you've got a pair of earrings and you lose one of them, it happens to be covered on your policy, or it's damaged in some way, it's covered on your policy. Very often, when you don't have the set, if you only have half of the set, its value is actually less than half because the value comes from having the entire set. So, as I say, typically, or not typically, often insurers will just say, just give me what you've got and I'll just replace, I'll give you the cash value for it so you can buy a brand new set. But if you can buy a replacement, then they may give you the value of the replacement. But the idea is that when you have a set, say if one thing or two things are damaged from the set, the value of the set can decrease by more, it may decrease by more than the actual cost of those two individual items. So the open perils we spoke about briefly. So open perils coverage includes all physical losses except certain specifically excluded losses. Okay, so open perils, everything is covered unless it's excluded. So to determine what is insured, you have to look at what is excluded. Now, if it's not excluded, then it's included. Homeowners policies with open perils coverage they do contain a number of exclusions, which we're going to be looking at in a moment. So on open perils dwelling exclusions for your dwelling, just look at a few of the things that are going to be excluded. We've got freezing. So freezing can be cause problems with your plumbing, heating, air conditioning. You can see there. It's normally only an issue when the property is left vacant or unoccupied, or when it's under construction. So when it's under construction, if there's any losses due to freezing, then typically they're not covered. Unless, of course, heat is maintained or the water system is shut off before you were unattending the building or you were not attending the building. So look at your policy wording. So policy exclusions for dwellings. Fences, pavements, patios, and similar structures. Very, very often they're actually excluded in policies for dwellings. They may not cost that much to repair, or they might not cost that much to an insurance company but you may actually get a lot of losses emanating from them, a lot of small losses, and those small losses can end up to a big loss, and a big loss, a big cost is going to end up in pushing the insurance company to charge you a higher premium. People typically don't want to pay a higher premium. So what other dwelling exclusions do we have? Buildings under construction, it says no theft coverage for materials or supplies. Coverage normally begins when a dwelling is completed and occupied, but if a building is under construction, your homeowners won't cover it, but there'll be another insurance that your contractor should be able to have that will be covering it. If you leave your home empty, your property empty for over 60 days, that's going to be a problem, especially if there's any vandalism, broken windows, and stuff like that. So a dwelling, well, you can see it up for the purposes of this coverage, for the vacancy beyond 60 days, a dwelling under construction is not considered vacant. Mold, fungus, or wet rot, they're generally excluded. There are even exceptions to that. If there's mold on your ceiling, they're not going to pay for it, but if there's mold that you discover behind the wall that you weren't aware of, then that they probably would cover under your dwelling exclusions. Other general exclusions, apart from your dwelling and your property insurance, are listed here. So you can read those off and see what they mean. Let's remind that wear and tear is what is wear and tear. Wear and tear is damage that naturally and inevitably occurs as a result of normal wear or aging. So that's wear or tear. I've got a tire, brand new tire, put it on my car, drive it for 60,000 miles, then I need a new one because there's no tread on it. It's worn out. Inherent vice. Well, what is inherent vice? This is the tendency in physical objects to deteriorate because of the fundamental instability of the components of which they are made, as opposed to deterioration caused by external forces. So what it's saying is that, like a tire, I buy the same tire, I don't put it on my car this time, I have it sitting out in the sun. Rubber in the sun, the rubber tire in the sun is going to degrade, and it's going to actually crack, and it's going to break away. If you leave it there long enough, it's going to just be nothing. It's going to be useless to you. Incidentally, when you buy a tire, there's a date of manufacture on it, and sometimes you find really cheap tires. They're maybe brand new tires, they have never rolled on the road before, but they may be several years old, and those tires maybe shouldn't be sold at all, not even at a cheaper price. You should always check when you buy those. So there's a difference between wear and tear and inherent vice. The example of the tire I just gave you. Latent defect is a hidden defect that you couldn't reasonably have known about, even if you'd inspected before. So you could see them, smog, stuff like that. Lost due to birds, vermin, rodents, insects, and domestic animals. So these are other things that are actually excluded, typically from the open perils, but these are not part. They're not part of the dwelling exclusions. It's a different set of exclusions, and these are almost universal to all types of policy. This list that you see right here. So that's general open perils. And how about just all property exclusions? Forgetting about open perils, something that applies to all property exclusions, not just open perils. So there are many exclusions. There are several exclusions, depending on which company you go to, that apply to all property, including earth movement, and it's not restricted to earthquake, flood, war. War may be a strange one. I always felt war was a strange one when I saw it when I first started work, because most countries, I was raised in England, never had an inkling of a war there, but you never know. So insurers put it in there to cover themselves. Intentional loss, neglect, spoilage. Spoilage actually used to be included in many policies before. Spoilage is when, for example, what they're talking about here, there's a power cut. For a few days, everything in your fridge goes bad, and you can actually claim for that stuff. Any problems, any losses from a power outage. A lot of people claim for their TV sets. They said, oh, there was a power outage, and when the power came back, there was a power surge, and all my electrical equipment is done, and also all the contents of my fridge are done. And was this moral hazard? Maybe in some cases it was. Concurrent causation. Back in the 80s in California, they developed some legal doctrine called the concurrent causation. And basically it says that if there's two perils, and one of them is a covered loss and one of them is not. So one of them you're actually covered if you get a loss from, the other one you're specifically not. If they occur together or concurrently, then the insurer has to actually pay you for the loss caused by both of them. So let's take an example. This commercial building is damaged by both wind and flooding from heavy rain. So the building is insured under a standard property policy. That's what we're going to assume. The policy, the loss, on the policy is the result of two causes causing the loss: wind, which let's suppose that's covered in your policy, and flooding, which is excluded from your policy. If the concurrent causation doctrine applies to the loss, that means the insurer has to pay for all of the damage caused by the wind and the flooding. And that's because wind is a covered peril. The damage caused by flooding is covered as well with this concurrent causation doctrine. The insurer must pay the entire loss whether one peril preceded the other or both occurred at the same time. It's kind of interesting. Optional property endorsements, so homeowners policies. So many property endorsements are available. So we'll remind ourselves of what an endorsement is. So when it comes to insurance, an insurance endorsement is an amendment or addition to an existing insurance contract which changes the terms or the scope of the original policy. Endorsements may also be referred to as riders. You have to be very aware of what the meaning of words is. An insurance endorsement may be used to add, delete, exclude, or otherwise alter coverage. So risk managers, whether personal or integrated working for a company, they have to decide which, if any, of endorsements are appropriate for their company, their circumstances. So there are several. We're just going to look at three of them: earthquake, inflation guard, and guaranteed replacement cost. So earthquake, interesting one again. In California, they suffer from earthquakes a lot, and nobody buys earthquake insurance. No one used to buy earthquake insurance because it's very expensive. And then the government-backed scheme for earthquakes. So now you can actually buy it. Most insurance are actually offering it, but it's really quite expensive because they're still waiting for that big one. So the frequency around America, perhaps not so much in California, is low, and so that few people actually purchase the coverage. And that's interesting. But even in California, where there's earthquakes occur quite frequently, they're not that devastating. People still don't buy it because the premiums are so high. And as I said, that's why the government kicked in. There's governments and state schemes that actually you can get insurance through, and a lot of insurance are actually offering it now anyway through your regular policy in California, but it's kind of expensive. So the endorsement actually eliminates a loss from flood or tidal wave. Why would a flood or tidal wave be connected to earthquakes? Because earthquakes can take place under the sea, and when an earthquake takes place under the sea, it can cause a flood or a tidal wave. So an earthquake deduction endorsement may be in the form of a deductible. So they say, well, we will insure you for your property if there's an earthquake, but the deductible we're going to place on it is between 5 and 20%. That's pretty high if you imagine that you've got a property worth $150,000. $150,000 in California is not really going to happen, but let's just say $150,000 property and you have to pay 20%. It's destroyed, and you've got 20% deductible. You have to pay the first 20% of $30,000 of that. So not only is the insurance expensive, it's got high deductibles. Also, a lot of people are hoping that, or relying on the government. They say if there's going to be a big earthquake, and it's so devastating, the government's going to kick in and help us out. Like they try to, but they can only go so far. Inflation guard. This is another endorsement that we're talking, since we're talking about these additional homeowners policies endorsements. There's so many endorsements, but I'm just looking at 3 right now. Inflation guard basically is coverage, and it's an add-on endorsement. So you endorse your policy, you add it on to keep your home insurance at the level it was, or at the level it will cost you to rebuild it. So So when you insure your property right at the beginning, maybe let's say it's worth $100,000, and a year later it's worth $110,000. And so if just before the year's up, something happens to your property and they have to rebuild it, they're only going to give you $100,000 because it went from 100, its value went up to 110, but there's no inflation guard. The inflation took the prices up by 10%. With inflation guard, what they typically do is they revalue your property every 3 months. So if you insure your property and at the end of the year there is a loss, your property would have been indexed, or its value on your insurance contract would have actually increased to cover you for the cost of inflation. This only happens every 3 months, so it's not a perfect way of covering your home. Back in the day, many insurance companies would let you insure your home, say for $100,000 in 2000, and 2020 you're still insured. You'd still be insured. Well, 20 years later, you'll still be insured for the same $100,000, even though your house is now worth, $500,000. So indexation sometimes is part of the policy, or sometimes it's an endorsement. And even this type of indexation, if it only takes place once a year, or twice a year, or 3 or 4 times a year, it's not fully covering you for all inflation costs. But it's going in some way to actually helping out. Guaranteed replacement cost endorsement, again, this applies to the dwelling, the actual house. Basically, it pays you the cost of rebuilding your house or whatever it needs to be done, but because it's a guaranteed replacement cost. So it does give you full replacement cost. There's no set policy limit. They don't say we're insuring you for $300,000. All you do is at the beginning of the policy, they say just insure your property for the full value. So don't insure it for 80% or 85 or 90% of its value. Insure it for the full value. And with the guaranteed replacement cost, they've got their own formulas. The actuaries, the risk managers, they'll figure out what the cost of the property is, and they'll charge you an according premium for it. I just want to put a note on flood insurance, which is fairly interesting. I'm sure most of us have heard of FEMA, which stands for the Federal Emergency Management Association, which is basically a government agency which helps not just with floods, but with all sorts of disasters that come upon the country. FEMA seems to be there. So FEMA is not something that's there for just flood insurance. It's there for everything. And basically, it's not a replacement for insurance. It's not supposed to be a replacement for insurance, and they don't have unlimited funds, even though they're backed by the government. They're a government agency. But they're there to help out in disasters in many different ways. But actually, from FEMA, you can actually buy flood insurance. So if you're in a zone where your insurer doesn't want to, your regular commercial insurer doesn't want to give you insurance for a flood because it's deemed to be too risky where you're at, you can actually go to FEMA and buy insurance through them, which is pretty good. So the whole point of what we've looked at today is kind of scratching at the surface. The homeowners policies are there's so much literature on them. There's so many different variations on them. They have some commonality between them, but what we need to get to terms with is that there is a very wide range of them, different types of policy with different types of coverage, with wording which may mean, or the same word may mean different things in different parts of the same policy. So that's what I want you to be aware of. It's interesting to know about FEMA. It's interesting to know about the guaranteed replacement cost, inflation guard, earthquake endorsements, and it's interesting to know about wear and tear, inherent bias, latent defect. These are all nice things to learn about, but also I want you to develop the general understanding, or a general you have some sort of sense, like a sniffer dog, to actually figure out what's going on when you're reading something, to be able to dig deeper and find exactly what this thing means and what's covered. There's a lot of times people are covered for things that they're not aware they're covered for. And you may say that's a good thing, but not necessarily, because if you're paying insurance to be covered for something in your policy that you're not even aware of, you're wasting money. And other times, especially if you're not going to claim, some people have the coverage and they're paying for coverage for something that they're not aware that they're covered for something, like spoilage of, if there's a power surge, for example, and let's take away from spoilage of food. If there's a power surge, then you can actually claim for your TV. You say my TV was damaged or whatever. Some people have this coverage and they're not aware of it, so they're paying for it and they're not claiming. It's just a waste of money. And also, if you're going to be in the business as an actuary, as a risk manager, or even as a savvy consumer, you need to know these things. You need to be aware of these things and just be able to analyze them and make the right choices, make the right decisions. Arm yourself with all the information so you can make the right decisions.